Some women learn how to hide bruises better than they learn how to do their makeup. By 26, I could do both in under 10 minutes. The bathroom mirror at Bellagio's steakhouse reflected a girl who looked more tired than alive. Fluorescent lights washed the color out of my skin while cheap concealer sat heavy beneath my eyes, barely covering the faint purple shadow near my jaw. I pressed a folded paper towel against my split lip and waited for the bleeding to stop before checking the time on my phone again. 8:42 p.m. Friday night. Prime dinner rush. Marco was probably already yelling about table assignments outside. I took a slow breath and forced my shaking hands to steady themselves against the marble counter. "Smile, Claire," I whispered softly to my reflection. "Nobody tips broken girls." The words tasted bitter because they were true. In Manhattan, people paid good money for beautiful experiences. Expensive wine. Candlelight. Pretty waitresses who looked effortless carrying silver trays beneath crystal chandeliers. Nobody wanted to see sadness served beside a 16-ounce ribeye. I twisted the cap off my foundation and dabbed another layer across my cheekbone. The makeup burned slightly against tender skin, but not enough to matter. Pain had become background noise these past 8 months. Like traffic outside my apartment. Or the sound of rain hitting subway grates after midnight. Constant. Familiar. Easy to ignore if I focused hard enough on surviving the next hour. My phone buzzed suddenly against the counter, making my stomach tighten instantly. Ethan. Just his name alone was enough to make my chest feel small. I stared at the screen while it rang, my pulse thudding hard in my throat. Missed call. Then another buzz. "Where are you?" I typed back quickly with numb fingers. "Working. Busy tonight." 3 dots appeared immediately. "Don't ignore me again." I swallowed hard and locked the screen without replying. Outside the bathroom door, applause suddenly erupted through the restaurant, followed by excited murmurs that rolled across the dining room like a wave. I frowned slightly, slipping my phone into my apron pocket before opening the door carefully. The warm scent of garlic butter, expensive cigars, and red wine hit me instantly. Bellagio's glowed gold tonight. Every table full. Every chandelier reflecting against polished marble floors. But something had changed in the room. The energy felt heavier now. Tighter. I followed the direction everyone else was looking and saw him the moment he walked through the front entrance. Damien Moretti. Even if nobody had whispered his name around the city for years, I still would have known he was dangerous. Men like him carried silence around them differently. Tall. Dark tailored suit. Black overcoat draped across broad shoulders still damp from the rain outside. His hair was slicked back neatly, revealing sharp features that belonged on magazine covers instead of whispered crime stories. But it was his eyes that made my stomach twist uneasily. Cold gray blue. Calm in a way that didn't feel human. The maitre d' practically sprinted to greet him while half the restaurant pretended not to stare. Damien moved through the dining room slowly, men in black suits following several steps behind him, but somehow he still looked alone. Untouchable. Like the entire city bent itself quietly around whatever mood he happened to be in tonight. Marco suddenly grabbed my elbow hard enough to startle me. "Claire," he hissed under his breath. "VIP section. Table 7. Move." I nodded automatically, clutching my tray tighter before turning toward the private dining area near the windows. My sneakers squeaked faintly against the polished floor as I walked, and I hated that I suddenly felt so aware of everything about myself. My cheap uniform shoes. My drugstore makeup. My trembling hands. The closer I got to table 7, the quieter the room around me seemed to become. Damien Moretti sat at the center now, one hand resting near a crystal whiskey glass while the men around him spoke carefully in low voices. Powerful men usually demanded attention. Damien didn't have to. He simply existed, and everyone else adjusted themselves accordingly. I lowered my eyes politely and reached for the wine bottle beside his table. Would you like another pour, sir? My voice came out softer than intended. For a second, nobody answered. Then I felt it. That horrible awareness crawling slowly up my spine. I looked up before I could stop myself. Damien was already watching me. Not my face. Not my body. My wrist. The sleeve of my uniform had shifted slightly while pouring the wine, exposing the fading fingerprint-shaped bruise near the inside of my arm. His expression didn't change. That somehow made it worse. Because the entire table went silent anyway. And for the first time all night, I forgot how to breathe. The air around table 7 felt too still after that. Nobody spoke for several seconds, and in a Manhattan steakhouse filled with politicians, hedge fund managers, and women dripping in diamonds, silence like that was unnatural. My fingers tightened instinctively around the wine bottle while heat crawled slowly up my neck. I tugged my sleeve down quickly, but it was already too late. He had seen it. Damien Moretti leaned back slightly in his chair, one hand resting near his whiskey glass while his cold gray-blue eyes remained fixed on my wrist. He did not look angry. He did not even look surprised. Somehow, that frightened me more. One of the men beside him cleared his throat awkwardly and reached for his drink like he suddenly wanted to disappear. Another adjusted his cufflinks without looking at me. Nobody at that table seemed comfortable anymore. "You are shaking," Damien said finally. His voice was low and calm, carrying the faintest trace of an Italian accent beneath polished American vowels. The kind of voice that belonged in dark rooms and expensive suits. I forced a small smile automatically. Long shift. His eyes flicked briefly toward my face. Toward the concealer near my jawline. Then back to my wrist again. "That does not look like a work injury." My stomach dropped hard enough to make me dizzy. "I am fine, sir." The word sir felt ridiculous the second it left my mouth. Damien studied me for another long second that somehow stretched forever. Then he slowly reached for the whiskey glass in front of him, swirling the amber liquid once before speaking again. People who are fine usually do not flinch every time someone raises their voice. I froze. Completely. Across the restaurant, Marco shouted something toward the kitchen window, and I realized with horror that Damien was right. My shoulders had tightened instantly at the sound. Like a reflex. Like fear lived permanently inside my nervous system now. Heat burned behind my eyes. Not tears. Just exhaustion. I straightened carefully and reached for the empty plates instead. "Can I bring you anything else tonight?" Damien ignored the question entirely. "What is your name?" "Claire." "Claire what?" "Bennett." He nodded once, almost thoughtfully, like he was filing the information somewhere important. "How long have you worked here, Claire Bennett?" My pulse quickened. "About a year." "Nursing student?" My breath caught. "How did you know that?" One corner of his mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile. "Your textbook is sticking out of your bag behind the hostess stand." I glanced instinctively toward the front of the restaurant. Sure enough, the corner of my anatomy book was visible beside my jacket. Embarrassment flushed through me. God. Of course he noticed that too. Damien noticed everything. One of the men beside him checked his watch nervously before leaning closer. "Damien," he murmured quietly. "The meeting." Damien lifted one finger slightly without taking his eyes off me. The man immediately fell silent again. It was such a small gesture, but the entire table obeyed him instantly. Power without effort. That was somehow worse than yelling. "Claire." My attention snapped back toward him. "Yes." His gaze drifted once more toward the bruise hidden beneath my sleeve. "Whoever put fear in your eyes made a very serious mistake." My throat tightened painfully. I should have walked away then. Any smart woman would have. But something about the way he said it made my chest ache unexpectedly. Not pity. Not curiosity. Certainty. Like he had already decided something terrible and irreversible inside his head. I lowered my eyes quickly. You do not know anything about me. No, Damien said softly. But I know what fear looks like. The restaurant noise slowly returned around us after that. Silverware clinking. Glasses breaking softly near the bar. Jazz music. Humming beneath low conversations. But table 7 still felt colder than the rest of the room somehow. Dangerous in a quiet, elegant way. I gathered the empty plates carefully, trying to ignore how badly my hands were trembling again. Then Damien spoke one final time before I could leave. Claire. I looked up. His expression had gone completely unreadable now. Calm. Controlled. Terrifying. If someone is hurting you, he said quietly, you should pray they never meet me. The rest of my shift passed like a fever dream after that conversation. Every time I stepped into the dining room, I could feel Damien Moretti watching me without actually looking directly at him. It was subtle. Controlled. But impossible to ignore. Some people demanded attention loudly. Damien did it with silence alone. By 11:30, the dinner crowd had finally started thinning out. Half-empty wine glasses cluttered tables beside crumpled linen napkins and candle wax dripping slowly across crystal holders. My feet hurt so badly I could barely feel my toes anymore. The skin beneath my makeup burned from exhaustion, and every time I smiled at another customer, my jaw ached slightly near the fading bruise Ethan had left 2 nights earlier. I kept my focus on work. Refill drinks. Clear plates. Avoid thinking. That was how survival worked. Near midnight, Marco finally waved me toward the back hallway. Take your break before cleanup, he muttered while counting receipts. You look terrible. Thank you, I replied dryly. He snorted once before walking away toward the kitchen. I slipped into the employee hallway quietly, grateful for the temporary silence away from customers and polished fake smiles. The buzzing fluorescent lights overhead made everything look pale and tired. I leaned against the cold wall for a second and closed my eyes. My phone buzzed immediately in my apron pocket. Ethan again. 8 missed calls now. 3 voicemails. My stomach twisted harder with each notification. Then another text appeared. Answer me right now. I stared at the screen while my heartbeat quickened painfully. I already knew what tonight would become when I got home. The questions. The accusations. The pacing. Ethan always hated when I worked late shifts because he imagined every man in Manhattan wanted something from me. The irony would have been funny if it did not feel so exhausting. I typed carefully with trembling fingers. Busy. Coming home soon. 3 dots appeared instantly. Who were you talking to tonight? I froze. Another message arrived before I could answer. Do not lie to me, Claire. Fear crawled slowly into my chest again, cold and familiar. I shoved the phone back into my pocket quickly, suddenly unable to breathe properly in the narrow hallway. You look like you are about to faint. I jumped so hard my shoulder hit the wall behind me. Damien stood at the far end of the hallway near the kitchen entrance, one hand tucked calmly into the pocket of his black overcoat. I had not even heard him approach. God. My pulse hammered violently now. You scared me. That was not my intention. His voice remained calm as always, but those gray-blue eyes missed nothing. They flicked briefly toward the pocket holding my phone. Bad news? No, the lie came too quickly. Damien tilted his head slightly, studying me the same way someone studies cracks forming in glass. You lie very fast, Claire Bennett. Heat flushed across my face. Why do you care? The question escaped before I could stop it. Silence settled between us again. Somewhere behind the kitchen doors, dishes crashed loudly followed by distant laughter from the cooks finishing cleanup. But Damien remained completely still. Because fear changes people, he said finally. And I do not enjoy watching it happen. I crossed my arms instinctively. You do not even know me. I know enough. His gaze dropped briefly toward my wrist again before returning to my face. I know you apologize too much. I know loud voices make you tense. I know you check your phone every 30 seconds like you are waiting for permission to breathe. My throat tightened painfully. Nobody had ever said those things out loud before. Not even me. Damien stepped slightly closer, expensive leather shoes silent against the hallway floor. The man texting you, he said quietly. Is he the reason you are afraid to go home tonight? I looked away immediately because suddenly the hallway felt too small. Too warm. Too honest. Please, I whispered softly. Do not interfere. Damien watched me carefully for several long seconds. Then his jaw tightened slightly for the first time all evening. Such a tiny movement most people would never notice it. But something dark shifted behind his eyes afterward. Something controlled. Dangerous. Claire, he said quietly, men who hurt women rely on silence to protect them. I swallowed hard. You do not understand. Then help me understand. My phone buzzed again between us like a warning. Damien glanced downward briefly as Ethan's name lit through the fabric of my apron pocket. And for the first time that night, Damien Moretti looked angry. For one dangerous second, neither of us moved. My phone continued vibrating inside my apron pocket while Damien stared at the glowing outline of Ethan's name through the thin fabric. The expression on his face did not explode into rage the way normal men reacted when they were angry. Damien became quieter instead. Colder. Like a storm pulling inward before landfall. I reached into my pocket quickly and silenced the call with trembling fingers. It is not what you think, I whispered automatically. Damien's eyes lifted slowly back to mine. That sentence usually means the opposite. Heat burned behind my ribs. God, I was tired. Tired of lying for someone else. Tired of making excuses that sounded thinner every time I said them out loud. But fear was a habit now. Fear taught you to protect the person hurting you because surviving tomorrow mattered more than honesty tonight. I folded my arms tighter across myself. Please just let it go. Damien studied me for several long seconds without speaking. Somewhere behind him, one of his men appeared briefly near the kitchen entrance before stopping immediately the moment Damien glanced sideways. A silent order passed between them. The man nodded once and disappeared again without saying a word. My stomach tightened uneasily. You should not be alone tonight, Damien said finally. I am fine. No, the answer came calm and immediate. You are frightened. I looked away toward the buzzing fluorescent lights overhead because hearing someone say it out loud felt unbearable. You do not know anything about my relationship. I know enough to dislike him already. Despite myself, a tiny breath of humor escaped me before I could stop it. Barely even a laugh. But Damien noticed. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly, something softer touching the edges of his features for half a second before disappearing again. There, he murmured quietly. That sounded more real than anything you have said all evening. I hated how much those words affected me. Maybe because Ethan had spent so long convincing me that every emotion I had was dramatic or irrational. Maybe because Damien looked at me like he was seeing damage instead of weakness. My phone buzzed again. Another message. I did not even need to read it to know the tone already waiting there. Damien noticed my hesitation. Read it. No, Claire. The way he said my name made my pulse flutter unexpectedly. Gentle. Firm. Like he was used to being obeyed without raising his voice. Slowly, I unlocked the screen. Ethan's message filled the display immediately. I saw you talking to him. Who is he? Another text arrived beneath it before I could hide the phone. You think rich men are going to save you now? Shame crawled hot beneath my skin. I moved to lock the screen quickly, but Damien's eyes had already scanned the words. Silence settled heavily between us afterward. Not awkward silence. Dangerous silence. Damien exhaled once through his nose, slow and controlled, before reaching for my phone carefully. May I? The question itself startled me more than anything else tonight. Men like Damien Moretti probably took whatever they wanted. Yet he still asked permission. I handed him the phone before I could rethink it. His thumb moved once across the cracked screen, reading through the recent messages quietly. The hallway suddenly felt freezing cold despite the heat pouring from the kitchen nearby. Finally, Damien handed the phone back to me. His jaw looked carved from stone now. How long? My throat tightened. What? How long has he spoken to you this way? It is complicated. Damien's eyes darkened slightly. No. Men like him depend on women believing it is complicated. I swallowed hard against the sudden ache rising into my chest. Nobody had ever defended me before. Not really. Friends stopped asking questions months ago because I always lied anyway. My mother lived in Ohio and thought Ethan was charming. And somewhere along the line, I had started believing maybe exhaustion was easier than leaving. Damien stepped closer then, not enough to frighten me, just enough that I caught the clean scent of rain and expensive cologne still clinging to his coat. Listen to me carefully, Claire. His voice dropped lower. Fear becomes a prison when you get used to carrying it. My eyes burned suddenly. I looked down fast before he could notice. I cannot just leave. Why not? I opened my mouth. Closed it again. Because love had once existed before fear. Because rent in Manhattan was impossible alone. Because Ethan was not cruel every day. Because some nights he apologized so sincerely it made me feel guilty for being hurt at all. Damien watched the conflict move across my face silently. Then he said something that made my heart stop for a second. Does he know where you are right now? My breathing faltered. Because outside the restaurant windows, rain was falling harder now. And somewhere deep in my gut, for the first time all night, I realized Ethan probably did. My silence answered Damien before I could. His eyes sharpened immediately, reading the fear spreading across my face with terrifying accuracy. Outside the narrow hallway window near the emergency exit, rain streaked down the glass in silver lines while headlights moved slowly along the wet Manhattan streets below. Midnight traffic. Taxis. Delivery trucks. Normal life continuing somewhere beyond this conversation that suddenly felt too heavy to breathe inside. Claire. Damien's voice softened slightly. Does he know you are here? I nodded once before I could stop myself. Shame settled hot beneath my skin immediately afterward. He tracks my location sometimes, I admitted quietly. Saying it out loud made it sound worse than I usually allowed myself to believe. Damien stared at me for a long moment. You let him track your phone. I crossed my arms tighter instinctively. It keeps him calm. Even to my own ears, the explanation sounded fragile. Damien looked away briefly, jaw tightening hard enough that a faint muscle shifted beneath his cheek. For the first time tonight, he seemed less like a polished businessman and more like something dangerous trying very hard to stay controlled. Fear should never be the price of peace, he said quietly. My eyes burned again. God. Why did everything he said feel like he was peeling apart truths I had spent months trying to bury? Before I could answer, the back kitchen door suddenly swung open. Marco stepped halfway into the hallway holding inventory sheets before freezing instantly when he saw Damien standing there with me. The color drained from his face so quickly it almost would have been funny under different circumstances. Mr. Moretti, Marco said carefully. I did not realize. Damien glanced toward him once. Claire is taking her break. Marco nodded immediately. Too quickly. Of course. Then his eyes flicked nervously toward me like he wanted to ask if I was okay but valued his survival too much to risk it. A second later, he disappeared back through the kitchen doors. I exhaled slowly after he left. People are afraid of you. Damien looked mildly amused by that. They should be afraid of bad men pretending to be decent. That is not an answer. It is the only one you are getting tonight. Despite everything, another tiny laugh escaped me unexpectedly. Damien noticed again. Those cold gray-blue eyes softened for half a heartbeat before turning serious once more. What time do you finish? Another 30 minutes. He nodded once like he had already expected that answer. Then you are not going home alone. My pulse stumbled hard. Damien, no, calm. Firm. Absolute. You are frightened every time your phone lights up. Your hands shake when someone raises their voice. And somewhere out there is a man who thinks controlling you is the same thing as loving you. I swallowed hard against the sudden pressure building in my throat. You cannot just decide to involve yourself in my life. Damien stepped slightly closer, lowering his voice. Claire, men like him count on isolation. They convince women nobody will help them. That nobody will believe them. That fear is normal. He paused briefly before adding, quieter now, I do not tolerate men who mistake kindness for weakness. My phone buzzed again. This time the vibration felt almost violent in the silence between us. I looked down slowly. Ethan calling again. Damien's gaze dropped briefly toward the screen before returning to me. Answer it. Absolutely not. If you ignore him now, he escalates later. The certainty in Damien's voice made my stomach tighten. Because deep down, I knew he was right. Ethan always escalated. Slowly, I lifted the phone to my ear with trembling fingers. Hello. Ethan's voice exploded through the speaker immediately, sharp with suspicion even at low volume. Where are you? I glanced toward Damien instinctively. His expression remained unreadable, but every inch of him had gone completely still. Work, I answered quietly. I told you that. Do not lie to me, Claire. I closed my eyes briefly. I am not lying. Ethan exhaled harshly through the phone. Then why is your location off? My stomach dropped. God. I had disabled the tracking earlier without even realizing it while trying to silence notifications. Ethan's voice lowered dangerously after my silence stretched too long. Who are you with? The hallway suddenly felt freezing cold. Damien watched me carefully without speaking. Waiting. Listening. Protecting without touching me once. I gripped the phone tighter. Nobody. Another pause. Then Ethan laughed softly. The sound made every muscle in my shoulders tense automatically. You always sound scared when you lie. Damien's expression darkened instantly at those words. Not dramatic anger. Something quieter. Worse. Because for the first time all night, Damien Moretti looked at my fear like it personally offended him. I asked you a question. Ethan's voice sharpened through the phone hard enough that I instinctively flinched. Damien noticed immediately. God, he noticed everything. I turned slightly away, lowering my voice. I am still at work. Then why does it sound like you are whispering? Rain hammered harder against the windows nearby, blurring the city lights into streaks of gold and white outside the restaurant. My reflection trembled faintly in the dark glass beside the emergency exit door. Pale skin. Exhausted eyes. A woman who had started apologizing before she even knew what she did wrong. Claire. Ethan's tone dropped lower now. More dangerous because it sounded calm. Who is with you? My throat tightened painfully. Nobody. Across from me, Damien crossed his arms slowly over his chest, his expression unreadable. Not once had he interrupted the conversation. Not once had he tried taking control of it. He simply watched me with the stillness of a man observing smoke before a fire. Ethan laughed softly again through the speaker. You always do this when someone is around. Do what? Pretend I am the bad guy. Shame flooded me instantly, even though part of me knew that was exactly what manipulation sounded like. Ethan had always been skilled at turning confusion into guilt. By the end of every argument, I usually apologized for things I still did not fully understand. I am tired, I whispered. Can we please talk tomorrow? Silence crackled briefly through the line before Ethan answered. Send me a picture. My stomach dropped. What? Right now. I want proof you are still at work. Heat crawled across my face immediately. Humiliation. Exhaustion. Anger I rarely allowed myself to feel. I glanced toward Damien instinctively again, wishing he could not hear this conversation anymore. But his face had gone completely expressionless now, in the way powerful men become expressionless right before something breaks. Ethan, if you have nothing to hide, then send the picture. I closed my eyes briefly. For a second, I saw myself clearly from outside my own body. 26 years old. Standing in a back hallway at midnight asking permission to exist peacefully. Something inside me hurt suddenly in a way bruises never reached. Damien stepped forward then. Not aggressively. Calmly. He extended one hand toward me. Give me the phone. My pulse stumbled. Damien, no. Claire. His voice stayed quiet. Controlled. You do not deserve this. Ethan was still talking through the speaker now, irritation rising louder by the second. Who are you talking to? I should have said no. Any reasonable person would have refused involvement from a man like Damien Moretti. But exhaustion makes decisions for you sometimes. So before fear could stop me, I placed the phone carefully into Damien's outstretched hand. Ethan immediately snapped, who the hell is this? Damien lifted the phone slowly to his ear without breaking eye contact with me. The better question, he said calmly, is who taught you that fear counts as love? Silence crashed through the line instantly. Even through the speaker, I could feel Ethan recalculating. Men like Ethan survived on intimidation. But intimidation only worked when the other person feared you more. Damien leaned one shoulder lightly against the hallway wall, perfectly relaxed. Claire is working, he continued evenly. And tonight, she is leaving safely. Ethan's voice returned sharper now. Defensive. Stay out of our relationship. Damien's eyes never left mine. Relationships require respect. Another dangerous silence followed. Somewhere beyond the kitchen doors, the staff had started closing down for the night. Distant laughter echoed briefly before fading again beneath the storm outside. Ethan finally scoffed bitterly through the speaker. You think some rich guy playing hero changes anything? Damien's expression did not shift at all. No, he said quietly. I think men eventually reveal themselves when someone stronger is watching. My breath caught softly in my chest. Ethan went silent again. Then finally, colder now, Claire. Come home. The words should have sounded normal. Instead they felt like a warning wrapped in familiarity. Damien lowered the phone slowly before holding it back out toward me. You do not have to be afraid of him tonight. I stared at him, heart hammering unevenly beneath my ribs. Because for the first time in months, somebody had spoken to Ethan without fear. And somehow that terrified me almost as much as it comforted me. Closing time arrived in a blur after that conversation. I moved through the restaurant on autopilot while servers stacked chairs onto empty tables and the kitchen staff shouted tired goodnights over the sound of industrial dishwashers. Rain still hammered against the tall front windows hard enough to blur the city outside into streaks of silver and gold. Normally, by midnight, Bellagio's felt warm and alive. Tonight it felt tense. Like everyone could sense something shifting beneath the surface. I avoided looking toward table 7 for the next 20 minutes, but I still felt Damien's presence everywhere. Calm. Heavy. Watching. When I finally carried the last tray into the kitchen, Marco stopped me near the lockers with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Nervous respect. "Claire," he said quietly, glancing toward the dining room entrance. "Your ride is waiting." Confusion tightened my forehead instantly. "My what?" Marco lowered his voice further. "Mr. Moretti said nobody leaves alone tonight." My stomach twisted immediately. He cannot just decide that. Marco gave me a look somewhere between sympathy and disbelief. I do not think many people tell Damien Moretti what he can or cannot do. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again inside my apron pocket. Ethan. 6 new messages. 1 voicemail. Fear slithered cold beneath my ribs instantly. I did not open them. I could not. Every notification felt like another hand tightening around my throat. Marco noticed my face pale slightly. "Claire," he said carefully, "is everything okay?" The question almost broke something inside me because he sounded sincere. I forced a smile anyway. "I am fine." He did not look convinced. Nobody looked convinced anymore. 10 minutes later, I stepped through the front entrance into cold rain and immediately froze. A black SUV waited at the curb beneath glowing streetlights, engine humming softly while rain slid across dark-tinted windows. 2 men in tailored black coats stood nearby beneath umbrellas, scanning the street with quiet attention. Not threatening. Protective. Across the sidewalk, Manhattan moved around them carefully. Pedestrians avoided eye contact. Taxi drivers slowed instinctively before continuing past. Power changed the atmosphere around people. Damien Moretti changed entire streets. My pulse quickened nervously as the restaurant doors shut behind me. One of the men opened the SUV's back door immediately. "Miss Bennett." I stared at him. I did not agree to this. "Mr. Moretti asked us to make sure you arrived home safely." I crossed my arms tightly against the cold rain. "That is completely unnecessary." A familiar voice answered from behind me before the guard could. "No. It is not." I turned sharply. Damien stood beneath the restaurant awning several feet away, hands tucked into the pockets of his dark overcoat while rain blurred the city lights behind him. He looked unfairly calm for a man who carried this much authority around like breathing. "You cannot control where I go," I said softly, though the words sounded weaker than I intended. Damien stepped closer slowly. "This is not about control." "Then what is it about?" His eyes held mine steadily. "Making sure fear does not follow you home tonight." My chest tightened painfully. God. Nobody had spoken to me this gently in so long that kindness itself felt unfamiliar now. Dangerous in a different way. I looked down toward the wet sidewalk. Ethan is not always like this. Damien's expression darkened almost imperceptibly. Women only say that sentence about men they are afraid of. Silence stretched between us beneath the sound of rain hitting pavement. Somewhere downtown, a siren echoed faintly through the city before fading again. Damien moved slightly closer, lowering his voice. "Claire. Look at me." Slowly, I did. His gray-blue eyes remained calm. Steady. Certain. "You are not responsible for managing another person's anger," he said quietly. "And you should never have to earn safety from someone who claims to love you." The words hit something deep inside me hard enough that I suddenly could not breathe correctly. Tears burned unexpectedly behind my eyes, humiliating and hot. I turned away immediately. "I do not even know why you care this much." Damien was quiet for several seconds before answering. Because I spent my entire life watching powerful men destroy gentle women while everyone else looked away. My breath caught softly. The city noise seemed to disappear around us after that. Rain. Headlights. Steam rising from subway grates beneath glowing streetlights. Just Manhattan holding its breath while a dangerous man looked at me like I mattered. Then Damien glanced briefly toward the far side of the street. His expression changed instantly. Not fear. Recognition. Cold focus. Get in the car, Claire. My stomach dropped. Why? Damien's eyes never left whatever he was seeing behind me. Because your boyfriend just arrived. Every muscle in my body locked instantly. I turned slowly toward the opposite side of the street, and there he was. Ethan stood beside his silver sedan beneath the rain-soaked glow of a street lamp, water dripping from the shoulders of his dark hoodie while headlights flashed across his face in broken streaks of light. Even from half a block away, I recognized the expression immediately. Controlled anger. The dangerous kind. My stomach twisted so hard it hurt. How did he find me? I whispered. Damien's voice remained calm beside me. You said he tracks patterns. My pulse hammered unevenly as Ethan started crossing the street toward us. Fast. Purposeful. The closer he got, the smaller the sidewalk suddenly felt. Fear worked strangely. It made grown women feel 16 again. Small. Cornered. Guilty for problems they did not create. Claire. Ethan's voice cut through the rain sharply. What the hell is this? I instinctively stepped backward before I could stop myself. Damien noticed immediately. So did Ethan. Something ugly flashed across Ethan's face at that tiny movement. Seriously, he snapped. You are hiding behind another guy now. Ethan, please lower your voice. Do not tell me what tone to use. The words cracked through the cold air hard enough that my shoulders tensed automatically. Damien's expression changed instantly beside me. Not dramatic anger. Something quieter. Colder. The kind of stillness that made powerful men dangerous. Ethan finally looked directly at Damien then, clearly recognizing him for the first time. Confusion flickered briefly across his face before irritation returned stronger than before. Who are you supposed to be? Damien slid one hand calmly into the pocket of his overcoat. Someone asking you to take one step back. Ethan laughed sharply. This is between me and my girlfriend. The word girlfriend hit strangely after everything tonight. Like ownership disguised as affection. Rainwater dripped from my hair down the back of my neck while taxis hissed through puddles nearby. Manhattan kept moving around us, unaware that my entire nervous system felt seconds from collapse. Ethan looked at me again, jaw tight. Claire. Get in the car. The command in his voice made my stomach knot instantly. Damien noticed that too. Of course he did. She is not getting into any car while frightened, Damien said evenly. Ethan scoffed. And she told you she is frightened of me? Silence. Because I did not answer quickly enough. Ethan's face hardened immediately. Unbelievable. He stepped closer suddenly, reaching toward my arm. I flinched before he even touched me. The movement happened so fast I barely processed it afterward. Damien shifted between us instantly. Smooth. Calm. Effortless. 1 second Ethan stood in front of me. The next, Damien blocked the space entirely. Rain slid down the shoulders of his black coat while those cold gray-blue eyes locked onto Ethan with terrifying composure. Do not touch her when she is afraid of you, Damien said quietly. Ethan stared at him in disbelief. You think you know anything about us? Damien's voice remained perfectly level. I know fear when I see it. The silence afterward felt enormous. Ethan glanced past Damien toward me, frustration mixing with humiliation now. Claire, tell him to back off. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Because suddenly I realized something awful. I did not want Damien to leave. Ethan saw the hesitation instantly. Pain flickered across his face for half a second before anger buried it again. You embarrassed me tonight, he said sharply. You ignored my calls. Turned your location off. Now you are standing here with him. Shame tried rising automatically inside me again, but this time something interrupted it. Damien's voice. Calm. Certain. Fear is not loyalty. Ethan's jaw tightened hard enough that I thought he might yell again. Instead he looked directly at Damien. You rich guys think you can buy anybody. Damien did not react emotionally at all. Somehow that made the entire exchange feel more unbalanced. No, he said quietly. But decent women eventually stop surviving men who treat kindness like weakness. My chest tightened painfully at the words. Rain poured harder around us now, soaking through my sleeves while headlights blurred across wet pavement. Ethan looked at me one last time, breathing hard through visible frustration. Then his eyes drifted toward the black SUV waiting nearby. Toward the silent men watching from beside it. Toward Damien Moretti standing calmly between him and the woman he usually controlled with raised voices and guilt. And for the first time since I met him, Ethan looked uncertain. Rain poured harder between us, turning the sidewalk into blurred reflections of headlights and neon signs while Manhattan carried on around a moment that felt strangely suspended in time. Ethan stood frozen several feet away, uncertainty flickering across his face for the first time since I had known him. Not fear exactly. But awareness. The sudden realization that intimidation no longer worked the way it used to. Damien remained perfectly still in front of me, one hand resting calmly inside the pocket of his overcoat while rainwater slid from dark strands of hair near his temple. He looked impossibly composed. Like storms adjusted themselves around him instead of the other way around. Ethan exhaled sharply through his nose before looking back at me. Claire, he said again, softer this time. Come home. My chest tightened painfully because part of me still remembered the version of Ethan from the beginning. The charming one. The man who brought coffee during nursing exams and kissed my forehead when I fell asleep studying anatomy flashcards at 2 a.m. Love never disappeared all at once. That was what made leaving so difficult. It faded slowly beneath fear until one day you realized you had spent months surviving someone instead of loving them. I looked down briefly at the rain-soaked pavement. I do not think home is supposed to feel terrifying. Silence. Ethan stared at me like I had physically struck him. Behind me, I sensed Damien glance sideways slightly, not interrupting. Not speaking for me. Just standing there like a wall between fear and breathing room. Ethan ran one hand through wet hair, frustration cracking visibly across his face now. You are acting like I am some monster. Damien's voice cut through the rain quietly before I could answer. No decent man needs fear to keep someone close. Ethan's jaw tightened immediately. Stay out of this. I would prefer to, Damien replied calmly. Unfortunately, she flinches every time you raise your voice. The words landed hard because they were true. Painfully true. Ethan looked at me then, really looked at me, and for one brief second I saw something unexpected beneath the anger. Shame. The realization hit him all at once. The bruises. The fear. The way my body reacted before my mind could. Ethan swallowed once, rain dripping from his lashes while the city hummed softly around us. Claire, he said quietly now, I never meant to make you afraid. Tears burned suddenly behind my eyes because I believed him. That was the tragedy of men like Ethan. Sometimes they did not start cruel. Sometimes they simply loved control more than they loved the person standing in front of them. I wrapped my arms tighter around myself against the cold. Intentions do not erase fear. Ethan looked like he wanted to argue. Instead he glanced once toward Damien again. Toward the silent SUV. Toward the men waiting nearby with the calm attention of trained protectors. Whatever Ethan saw there made something inside him finally settle. Not surrender exactly. Acceptance. He stepped backward slowly, rain splashing beneath worn sneakers. You really are serious about this, he muttered bitterly toward Damien. Damien's expression never changed. About her safety? Yes. Ethan laughed once under his breath, exhausted more than angry now. Then he looked at me one final time. I hope he is worth all this trouble. Before I could answer, Damien spoke quietly beside me. The trouble started long before tonight. Ethan's face hardened briefly at that before he finally turned away. I watched him cross the rain-soaked street alone, shoulders tense beneath the storm while headlights swept across the wet pavement around him. Something inside my chest hurt watching him leave. Not because I wanted to follow him. But because endings were painful even when they were necessary. The city seemed strangely quiet after his car disappeared into traffic. I exhaled shakily, realizing only then how hard my heart had been pounding. Beside me, Damien finally turned slightly toward me again. His voice softened almost imperceptibly. Are you alright? I let out a weak laugh through lingering tears. I honestly do not know. Damien studied me carefully for a long moment before removing his overcoat without hesitation and draping it gently over my shoulders. The fabric smelled faintly like rain and expensive cologne, warm despite the cold night air. That is all right, he said quietly. You do not have to figure everything out tonight. I looked up at him then. Really looked at him. At the dangerous man standing in the middle of Manhattan rain treating my fear like it mattered. Treating me like I mattered. Somewhere beyond us, thunder rolled softly across the city skyline while steam curled upward from subway grates beneath glowing streetlights. Damien opened the SUV door carefully beside me, gray-blue eyes never leaving mine. Come on, Claire, he said gently. Let me take you somewhere you can finally breathe.